Colchester is Britain's earliest recorded town, established by the Romans as their first capital city. Previously it was the Celtic fortress of Camulodunum, meaning stronghold of Camelos. It was first mentioned on coins minted by Tasciovanus in the period 20 to 10 BC. Boudicca, king of the Atrebates, who had branches on both sides of the English Channel and had been friends of Rome since Caesar's conquest, appealed to Emperor Claudius for aid. At the time of this appeal in 43 AD, the newly enthroned Emperor Claudius needed a military victory to secure his shaky position with the military. He saw this call for help as the perfect pretext. Aulus Plautius led the 4 Roman legions across to Britain, with Camulodunum being their primary target. Having defeated the enemies of Boudicca, the Romans settled an agreement with the tribes hostile to the Atrebates. They established a Roman legionary fortress, or castrum, the first permanent legionary fortress to be built in Britain. It was established within the confines of Camulodunum, Latinized as Camulodunum, following the successful invasion in 43 AD. It was home to the 20th Legion. The legion was withdrawn in circa 49 AD, with the legionary defences dismantled and the fortress converted into a town, with many of the barrack blocks converted into housing. Its official name became Colonia Victricensis, with discharged Roman soldiers making up the population. A Roman monumental temple, the largest classical-style temple in Britain, was built there in the 50s AD and was dedicated to Emperor Claudius upon his death in 54 AD. The city was the capital of the Roman province of Britannia. Its temple, the largest classical-style temple in Britain, was the centre of the imperial order. Tensions arose between the Roman colonists and the native British population around 60 or 61 AD, when the Roman authorities used the death of Iceni king Prasutagus as a pretext for seizing the Iceni client state from his widow Boudicca. The Trinovantes joined the Iceni rebels around Colonia Victricensis, who held several grudges against the Roman population of the town. These included the seizure of land for the colony's veteran population, the forced labour to build the Temple of Claudius, and the sudden recall of loans given to the local elites by leading Romans, which had been needed to allow the locals to qualify for a position on the city council. As the symbol of Roman rule in Britain, the city was the first target of the rebels, with its temple seen in British eyes as the Arx Aeternae Dominationis, stronghold of everlasting domination, according to Tacitus. Rebels destroyed the undefended city and they slaughtered its population. Many of them took refuge in the temple and were put to sword or axe, regardless of age or sex. In later centuries, the temple podium became the base of the Norman castle, upon which the later fortification still stands. Archaeologists have found layers of ash on the site of the city, suggesting that Boudicca ordered her rebel army to burn it to the ground. After the defeat of the uprising, the procurator of the Roman province moved to the newly established commercial settlement of Londinium, London. Following the crushing of the revolt, the new town was rebuilt on a larger scale and flourished, growing larger in size than its pre-Boudiccan levels, to 108 acres despite losing status to Londinium, reaching its peak in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. The town's official name was Colonia Claudia Victricensis, City of Claudius's Victory. Still, it was known colloquially by contemporaries as Camulodunum or simply Colonia. However, the late 3rd and 4th centuries saw a series of crises in the empire, including the breakaway Gallic Empire, of which Britain was a part, and raids by Saxon pirates, both of which led to the creation of the Saxon shore forts along the east coast of Britain. By the 5th century, Rome could no longer afford to garrison and protect this outpost of the empire, and the legions were withdrawn. Eventually, the now much smaller town came under Saxon rule, with London remaining as the capital city. In 869, King Edmund of East Anglia was defeated and killed by the Danes, and the east of England fell under Danish control. Under a peace treaty between Wessex and the Danes in 879, Colchester was incorporated in the Danelaw. Norfolk and Suffolk were heavily settled by the Danes, as can be traced by the density of Scandinavian place names. Northeast Essex was also colonised by the Danes. The region eventually came back under English rule with the defeat of the Scandinavians, which remained until William the Conqueror's invasion of 1066. Around 1069 or 1070, the town was given to the control of Eudo d'Apifer, also known as Eudo d'Eri, after his Norman hometown. Eudo directed the construction of Colchester Castle circa 1073 to 1080 on the remains of the Temple of Claudius as a royal rather than baronial castle, intending it to be at the centre of the defence of eastern England. Construction on the castle, which is the largest Norman castle ever built and the first stone keep in England, was initially halted in around 1075 and hastily fortified during a rebellion in East Anglia supported by a Danish fleet, but resumed shortly afterwards to be given to Eudo in 1089. Henry I later renewed this right in 1101, granting the Turrim and Castellum to Eudo in a charter. Under Eudo, the town prospered, reaching a population of 2,500, putting it in the middle rank of English towns. The town and its turbulent history were described sometime between 1087 and 1100.
The city of Colchester is placed in the eastern part of Britain, a city near to a port, pleasantly situated, watered on every side by abundant springs, with a very healthy air, built with very strong walls. A city to be reckoned amongst the most eminent, had not time, fires, floods, incursions of pirates and various strokes of misfortune obliterated all the monuments of the city.
Control of Colchester Castle reverted to the crown following the death of Eudo in 1120. After that, the castle was governed by crown-appointed constables, or was in the care of the High Sheriff of Essex when no one had that role. In 1190, the acquisition of 26 military tunics for the castle was evidence of a permanent garrison. In 1214, the hereditary constable was William de Lanvallae, one of the barons opposed to King John. In November of that year, John arrived at Colchester, probably in an unsuccessful attempt to win over Lanvallae, who shortly afterwards left the castle in the sheriff's care and joined the other rebel barons at Bury St Edmunds. Meanwhile, John sent a replacement constable to Colchester, Stephen Haringud, who was probably a Flemish mercenary, with orders to improve the castle's defences. The barons later marched on London, forcing John to accept the Magna Carta at Runnymede in June 1215, which included a provision that Colchester be returned to Lanvallae. Within months, John had refused to be bound by the terms of the charter, and the First Barons' War broke out. John sent an army towards Colchester under the command of a French mercenary called Savary de Mouléon. In the meantime, the barons had appealed to King Louis VIII of France for help. Accordingly, a French contingent had arrived to garrison Colchester Castle for the barons. The siege began in January 1216 and ended in March when King John himself arrived. The French garrison of 116 men was able to negotiate a safe passage to London. However, that didn't prevent them from being arrested there. Following the capture of Colchester, Haringud was reinstated as constable and made sheriff. But in 1217, this castle was handed over to the French and the barons as part of a truce agreement. However, it was recovered by the boy King Henry III in the Treaty of Lambeth in September 1217, finally ending the war, and William of Sainte-Mère-Église, the Bishop of London, was made constable. In 1650, a Parliament survey condemned the building and valued the stone at £5. In 1683, an ironmonger, John Wheely, was licensed to pull it all down, presumably to use as building material in the town. After great devastations in which much of the upper structure was demolished using screws and gunpowder, he gave up when the operation became unprofitable. The castle has had various uses since it ceased to be a royal castle. It was a county prison where in 1645 the self-styled witch-finder General Matthew Hopkins interrogated and imprisoned suspected witches. In 1648, during the Second English Civil War, the Royalist leaders Sir Charles Lucas and Sir George Lisle were executed just to the rear of the castle after Lord Fairfax's prolonged siege of the town. The town, incidentally, had earlier declared support for the parliamentarians, and the presence of the Royalist forces was wholly unwelcomed. A local and unproven legend states that grass will not grow on the spot they fell. A small obelisk now marks the point. In 1656, the Quaker James Parnell was martyred there. In 1705, the castle was sold to Sir Isaac Ribot, who left it to his grandson, Charles Chamberlain Ribot, in 1726. In 1727, the castle was bought by Mary Webster for her daughter Sarah, who was married to Charles Grey, the Member of Parliament for Colchester. To begin with, Grey leased the keep to a local grain merchant, and the east side was leased to the county as a jail. In the late 1740s, Grey restored parts of the building, particularly the south front. He created a private park around the ruin, and his summer house, perched on the old Norman castle earthworks in the shape of a Roman temple, can still be seen. He also added a library with large windows and a cupola on the southeast tower, completed in 1760. On Grey's death in 1782, the castle passed to his step-grandson James Round, who continued the restoration work. The part of the castle under the chapel remained used as a jail, which was enlarged in 1801. A long-serving jailer called John Smith lived on site with his family. His daughter Mary Ann Smith was born there in 1777 and lived her whole life in the castle, becoming the librarian until she died in 1852. She is believed to have planted the sycamore tree, which is still growing on top of the southwest tower, to celebrate the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, or to mark her father's death in the same year. Between 1920 and 1922, the borough of Colchester bought the castle and the associated parkland using a large donation from Wheatman Pearson, 1st Viscount Cowdray, a wealthy industrialist who had been the town's Member of Parliament. The wrought iron gates at the entrance to the park on Cowdray Crescent were created in Cheltenham by H. Martin and Company. The park is split into the upper and lower castle parks. A museum of artifacts owned by the borough had been displayed at the castle since 1860. The roofing over the keep in the mid-1930s allowed for a considerable expansion. Between January 2013 and May 2014, the Castle Museum underwent extensive refurbishment costing £4.2 million. The work programme improved and updated the displays with the latest research into the castle's history and supported roof repair. The castle is open to public visits and is occasionally used for ticketed ghost hunting events. And what of the hauntings of this ancient place of horror? James Parnell Quaker was arrested in 1652 for the heinous crime of being idle and disorderly after upsetting a local priest by preaching his beliefs in the church at Coggeshall. He was imprisoned after refusing to pay a fine. Local Quakers were prevented from helping him. He was so weak that he could not eat, dying on the 10th of April 1656. The authorities said that Parnell had died through fasting, but this was a wicked lie. Joseph Bess wrote in Sufferings that the jailer's wife beat Parnell and told her servant to beat him, sent his food to other prisoners, refused to let his friends bring him a bed, had him placed in a hole in the castle wall not so wide as some baker's ovens, which could only be accessed by climbing a ladder and then a rope. Bess notes that Parnell fell and was so wounded in his head and bruised in his body that he was taken up for dead. Bess wrote that he died a youth, but approved himself a strong man in Christ. It is no wonder that Parnell's ghost is said to haunt the castle now. There is a story that a foolhardy man once stayed the night in the dungeon as a wager, only to emerge the following morning a gibbering wreck. Another tale states that a headless nun haunts the castle, although her story is unknown. It's also said to be haunted by a red lady, who may be the daughter of one of its previous jailers, and may have links to the famous tree that grows on the castle roof. Some castle assistants have reported the Red Lady appearing behind you in the mirror of the old, now defunct ladies' toilets. Also, one staff member reportedly encountered a glowing green skull sitting on the floor of the Lucas vaults. Between 1645 and 1647, it was used to imprison over 200 accused women suspected of being witches by Matthew Hopkins. Many perished from jail fever while imprisoned at the castle, most before going to trial. Could their souls still be roaming this denizen of darkness, or perhaps the many Roman citizens who perished when the dungeon was the base of the Roman Temple that once stood there? Visitors to Colchester Castle reported an unearthly moaning sound from the recesses of the dark Roman vaults. The castle grounds themselves are also reported haunted by the spirits of soldiers garrisoned there who died in battle. Well, there ends another tale and another history of the great fortifications of ancient Britain. I hope you enjoyed this fascinating story and will join me again soon at another historical and legendarily haunted place. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this show, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and of course hit the bell icon for any fresh updates.